the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are mega excited, as you can see, to be joined by somebody who's dressed up as a Pontefract cherry. Trying to win favour over a Yorkshire man.
Hang on, Steve. If that's the intro and everybody just listens to this, that's going to be interesting.
No, it's not. So she's not dressed as a full cherry, just to call it out for anybody that's not watching.
Thank you.
Tara's got cherries on her top. And as we all know, and I've spoken about a million times, I live in Pontefract, which is the UK home to Haribo, which obviously do Tangfastics. The guest and Ben were laughing at me because my mum tried to give me some Tangfastics this morning. I was like, Mum, I'm not a 4-year-old. And also, don't give Haribo to my 4-year-old. Anyway, we're digressing. Where did I go with that?
Can I just say that most of our audience we know is in the US who have no idea what Tangfastics or Haribo are.
They do. My friend, who's just back from Chicago, is taking literally a whole suitcase back with him. He does it all the time. I was like, that's absolutely fine. But anyway, we're here to discuss a podcast. We are super excited for this one. As everybody knows, and Tara will introduce it, we had a wonderful event, pre-bet, in partnership with Clever. But actually, one of the really, really great bits and one of the bits of feedback, most positive bits of feedback about the event at Canva HQ was the actual panel, the discussions and the insights there. So we were like, you know what, let's carry on that conversation. We can't get all of those illustrious people together all the time. So let's definitely pick some conversations that carry on after with Tara around lots of things around the trends, but also, Ben, we talked about pick and mix. There's going to be lots that are going to unpick today, but also one thing that I'm really excited to dive into at some point will be that whole thing around securing the futures of our young people, but making sure that our data is secure. And I know that Clever is really, really strong on that. So, Ben, I'm not even going to ask you how you are, not because we don't have time, but because I just don't care. But actually, Tara, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you. That was a really interesting little soundbite you gave me there. I didn't realise that you've got so many US listeners. So to our US audience, they're going to be like, Clever? Of course, we're in nearly 80% of schools in the US, and it's just sort of synonymous with education. I saw like on a dressed up day at school, people dressed as the Clever icon in the US. And then it's been incredibly interesting in my role supporting Clever as we kind of break into the UK and Ireland and now into Europe, because people haven't heard of Clever. Hopefully after this podcast, they will know more. But Clever, we're the leading identity platform for schools globally, cybersecurity, securing student identities. That's absolutely the work that we do.
And if everybody wants just a bit of an understanding beyond the complexity of cyber and everything else, in terms of Clever, just think about that infamous or famous clip of that person that looked after basically the detection in Hawaii, and he basically put his own password and username on. Think of how often that's going on in regards to education. We've got some wonderful solutions there in it. But let's dive into beyond product. We sat on the panel, didn't we, Tara, and Ben led it really, really well in regards to lots of things that we're seeing as the trends, but also things that we deep dive into that. So, like, what are you seeing? Because I know for Clever, but also beyond that, you've seen a lot of things that really resonated with what we think, what we see, but also what you're seeing. And you're in schools. We talk about strategy and all of those steps in, but what does it look like on the ground when you're going in and you're working with these different leaders and educators?
Yeah. So one of the first questions I have when I'm coming in from a Clever perspective is thinking about the technology environment. And we've talked before actually about the school environment and the classroom environment and what that might look like. Now, you could probably kind of step foot into any primary classroom, and my background is primary, so I'll probably keep pulling it back to that as a primary senior leader. Most primary classrooms are the same, aren't they? And they look the same. I think at the Canva event, we joked about how well they captured that in the nativity films. Like they had those twinkle, other companies are available, posters up on the background and the boards. It was such a typical UK primary school environment. So you go into the same sort of spaces, but what I'm really interested is the student experience on the device. And what does that look like for our students from the moment they open the device, or which device they're using? How many devices have they got? And gosh, the difference from school to school in the same physical building when you start asking those questions, and you're both nodding along. I'm guessing you have this experience too. It can be vast. 2 primary schools on the same street. We do have that, don't we? One end of the street to the other. And what's happening digitally in those environments can be a vastly different experience.
And to be fair, that can even within a school. So you've got some students who may, if it's a bring your own device setup, they've got some students with a high-end iPad, and then somebody else with the most affordable tablet that's available, or they might have a teacher might have one device in one room, and then that whole, like, I had a conversation with a school recently. We've got a real mishmash, not just of individual devices that are there, but the things that they cast to, the screens that are there. There is such a huge disparity. And in the UK, I don't know if this is probably synonymous everywhere, but certainly in the UK, you could, if you teach in one classroom, you could have really strong Wi-Fi. If you teach in another one, maybe not. And it feels really crazy that in 2025, we are having conversations about connectivity, and we're having conversations about equity and of devices, but we've not arrived yet, have we? And I think
here we are.
Even as we start talking about how we can turbocharge education, people talking about AI, and we're talking about this and that and the other, we've still got to actually think about the nuts and bolts. And I know that you're passionate in that space, aren't you?
Yeah, and it is those nuts and bolts, or those first moments. And quite often in primary education, that first moment can be the login. Actually, we're big fans of Chromebooks, cost effective, work effectively in schools, individual, your Google email address and your password. But where we started our work with Clever is looking at, we've got a great relationship with Google, looking at that solution, that badge login solution, which I'm just waving if you're watching, sort of like a QR passcode. It's no longer on my lanyard, that a student can just open a device and badge in, and that's sat on top of that complex, secure password. And that then starts their journey into digital learning really safely and securely, but it's simple, and we're in and we're on. And Clever does so much more than that. But as we've grown in the UK, people will say, oh, you're the badge login. You've made it easy for me to get young learners onto devices.
And I know that, Steve, you'll want to jump in here. I've got a real, there's still a real issue around how confident people feel in that digital space. And we've talked often on the podcast about this digital native term being nonsense because nobody comes out of the womb being able to use an iPad. But this idea that just because most of our learners are confident in a digital space doesn't mean that them getting into accounts and making sure that they're safe and they're using the amount of primary schools that we have conversations with who have this issue with, they've got a really long email address because the person at the local council didn't think, oh, somebody's going to have to remember to write this in. They just thought, oh, we'll make it easy for ourselves and we'll just create this really long email suffix. And you're solving that problem. But also what that then means is that kind of overwhelm and anxiety that a lot of people still get, however old they are, however young they are. You're creating that space to let's enable and let's disable the anxiety or disable the overwhelm that comes into there, so that we can then get straight on. So we're not waiting for hours and hours and hours for things to work. So I think even though we know that Clever is way more than that, and we'll get into some of them conversations around that first entry point, reducing overwhelm and anxiety, sets the tone, doesn't it, for everything else that we want to work with.
Yeah, some language that we've been using, we were talking about equitable, that moment for 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, if they are struggling, we know, 1 in 10 young students in the classroom could have dyslexia. You've got a really long email address and you muddle up the I and the E, and then you're back to the start and you watch your peers raised ahead of you because they're logged on. I'd imagine there are a lot of educators listening to this who have seen it in a classroom. You've got 2 or 3 who log on quickly, and then other people around them getting anxious or overwhelmed. and they're starting off their lesson in that space of, frustration and teacher frustration as well.
And I think 2 points just on that as well. I think we also have to consider external stakeholders. So, like, as we move in terms of, like, I was a chair of governors, and I know Ben's been a chair. You've been in a primary school. It's not just the learner. It's not just the student that has a safety net and the support mechanism of the teacher when they're in there. If you don't go with a simple solution to then type this in, do this, and everything else, trying to do so and trying to do that for somebody that ultimately doesn't have that skill set as a parent or a guardian or a stakeholder is really, really challenging, because that, by not doing so, it brings greater complications in regards to in the classroom and beyond the four walls of a building, access to a designated, tailored, personal experience. And I know that yours is a loophole and the gateway into it, but actually it's beyond just logging in. If you give out a generic account, it's not just that. Ultimately, what you're also doing is everybody gets exactly the same experience. We talked about accessibility. We know, Ben mentions it all the time about what Paddy says from Text Help in regards to that. But ultimately, if you've got varying need in regards to accessibility, or or variations of apps and support and everything else that you're doing, how would you do that without giving a better personal experience? You cannot do that on a generic account. You can't extend that beyond the four walls of a building if you've given a generic account in class, because ultimately, if you're a browser-based Office 365 or Google, by signing into that and accessing it on, you don't do that. You don't get that experience. And I think, yes, it starts at the device level, but beyond that, we're really restricting the support that they get when the teacher and the support people are in the classroom. You can't extend that because we don't have the resources in school anyway. Trying to extend that into the real world when they're at home, I'm not a believer in homework. My daughter's school is getting that fact pretty clearly at the minute, because I'm not a refuser, but I'm like, she ain't doing any homework. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, she ain't doing any homework. So I am a refuser.
That sounds like a refusal.
Oh, yeah.
But
Look
so
at the definition of.
No, let me just. So I said, I didn't say no. I said, I'm not comfortable with her doing homework because she does so much learning in school. I want her to enjoy and explore and put that into context when she gets home and all these other things. So I'm not saying no. I'm saying you need to persuade me greater and better. But also, if she was going to do it, why is she doing a worksheet? Like, what? I left that when I was in education. This is not the education system and the teacher's fault. It's because ultimately we haven't stepped in and we also haven't supported that. So how can we have all of this? Go back to the very beginning of this conversation. In the US, it was 85%, it's now 75% have one-to-one devices. But what they also do in terms of the funding centrally, they also have infrastructure investment and support costs nationally. They did that because ultimately you're not then going to put a Formula One car on an A road. You're going to put it on a road that's fit for purpose, and that's what the challenge is with the devices. But what we're doing is we're going, well, you know what? You just got to kind of, and what you really get is a disparity in terms of the equity of access. So even that starting point, and we'll jump and get forward again. Tech is an enabler. Tech is an enabler. It's an extender. It's an enhancer. It's an engager. It does all of those stuff. Tech is an enabler with the right support and everything else. But how can you even do that when we are not given the investment to even? Because what do? Go back to worksheet, and then you don't even need. It bonkers to me. But going back to the whole principle of, we would never not put, Ben, you say it all the time, we'd never not put a ramp into a school now for accessibility. You would never put and remove accessibility or a more personalised, tailored experience for every learner that they need it throughout the day. Imagine if you've got a learner with SEND or that needs one-to-one support and care. Imagine not putting that in place in a school now. We do that physically in all other spaces, but we do not do that with technology.
I think that so much can be gained from sort of moving towards that single unified login. And we are starting to see movement in that direction. And we are learning from overseas and internationally. And what does it mean? And this is where you guys, in your experience, I don't really get lost in the back end, but I know you do. It does mean all that hard work in the back end, interoperability. It needs to be paramount, have systems that work together. We talked there, didn't we? If when I go into the school, what's going on? Different devices, different systems, multiple systems. It seems barrier after barrier. But we know that access and identity, they're going to work best when they're combined. So, yeah, we have these super powerful SSO identities, and we can now protect our young students. We can layer password security. We can add in MFA options, so we can have easy and secure access. But there's a lot of people involved in that process. As always, it's a regular conversation, is it, on Edufuturists? Who can we bring in, and how can we start to see and make these changes happen? And we're starting to hear some positive noise from government, but the reality, I think, is we're in, I suppose, an increasingly global ecosystem, and we'd love to hear more about what we can learn from elsewhere, what we can pull in, and how we can start to solve some of those problems.
Absolutely. And I think there are increasingly opportunities, because we're talking about secure logins there. We're talking about ease of use into that space. We also, and I know that this will come up about security, and you've mentioned that a few times there. And it's not security as in, we're going to be cyber secure and we can tick a box, because every teacher's done that course, and now they're not going to open
once
spam
at the
emails.
Start of the year.
Yeah, they're now not going to open spam emails. It's like that's not cyber security. Yes, we know that. I don't know what the stat is, so I feel like I'm going to be properly bastardizing it. But it's that idea of the vast majority of any cyber attacks are human error, and so it's somebody clicking on something.
I can throw a stat at you there, Ben.
Well, there you go.
Go on. So 1 in 4 school systems that experience a cyber attack targeting students.
Wow. So it's not even just at teachers now. We're talking students as well.
Students, that's an area of vulnerability, isn't it?
Access. Of course it is.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when we're talking about security there, and I know that we will get talking about this from a safeguarding perspective at some point, but some of the tools that are now in place to monitor students' devices are not about a control, but to be in a place where you can support and safeguard in that space. And I think that is where I'm at now. Is I'm thinking, I always worried about that big brother type conversation of, we've got to be able to see and control everything that they do. But there's a real benefit, I think, sometimes of. I get distracted. You've probably spotted that already. Like, if anybody's watching this, you know that I'm looking all over shore. It's not that I'm not interested.
It's not just looking at my cherries.
Not just looking at your cherries, Sarah. Indeed.
Well, that's another one that we're.
But I get distracted, and so if we could make sure that we can slim down what students have got available, that actually keeps them safe and secure. And it's like that. It's that agency, but agency within boundaries is what I think we're talking about here from a tech perspective. And I think there is that level of confidence that we need to breed in young people, but also that agency as well, isn't it? Because they're going to leave a school that's got everything locked down and banned this. I had a conversation with a trust the other day who's now saying they're banning AI. UAE schools have just announced that ChatGPT has been banned as we're recording this. Like, I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't ban things. I'm not going to get on that bandwagon. You could probably work out what my thoughts are on that. But what I am saying is that preparing them for their life outside of school? Rob Horban, we've had on the podcast multiple times. We talked about this at the Canva event that you were on the panel. Is that there is no locker for phones in the real world. You might have lockers for phones at school, but there isn't lockers for them. And he said that in 2016, 2017. And you're thinking, like, we're still having the same conversations about banning stuff and control and compliance. There's appropriate guardrails, there's appropriate support, but then we've got to develop that agency in young people as well as they grow age appropriately. Agreed? Good, perfect. I've stunned everybody into silence, or maybe I've just rambled on for too long.
We were deciding who was going next. Go on, Steve.
No, I just think guardrails are really, really important. Securing and making sure it's safe is really, really important. We all know, and as we move into beyond literally just AI, but if you think about the mobile phone ban and all that consideration, But actually, a lot of these policies that exist for such a long period of time anyway, maybe just stick to the policy that we created and go back to it. I think we had that conversation quite recently on the podcast around it. But also, like, not only that, if we don't have that, they're going to have it anyway, as Ben said. But if we don't have that, what is the alternative? So in today's now, okay, as of now, learners and young people, I must have said this at least 65 billion times now, are not wanting it, they expect it, because that is the world that we're in. So to remove something and not give the alternative, and the alternative to take it back to probably the way that we learned in the 80s and the 90s, is that the right thing? Or is it, we will do this, we will step into it and we will ban this, or we will remove it, but we will fund the alternative? The problem is it takes us back to a traditional education system that really isn't fit for purpose, or it was built, as we've said a million times again, that literally it was made for well before we all went to school. Like, literally, what are we doing here? What are we doing?
That was my point, wasn't it, about the buildings and the classrooms? And we're quite often, village schools, they can be Victorian buildings that are small, they don't necessarily fit the desks. And technology, obviously, the growth in technology versus the growth of the curriculum in the classroom, we can have that conversation about them being at odds. And there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word noise, but there are some phrases that stick out to me, and screen time is one of them. So there's some frustration around screen time, and the ban is quite often linked to screen time and the concern about screen use. So again, quite often when I'm talking to schools or adults, this ends up as dinner party conversations in my house. If you think of your phone and then you think of your laptop, so I'm chatting to you now on my MacBook, what are the first three things that you do on your phone? And what are the first three things that you do on your computer? And they're probably quite different things. Or is it the same for you, Ben?
No. I'm just saying I don't want to tell people what I do on either.
But my point in education is what we have is the ability to have some really good ecosystems, some structure, some guardrails, and we get to curate the school device. And we can be really supportive of what quality technology looks like in the classroom and the environment. And the argument for sort of, we don't want our kids, our children having any more screen time in schools, it's the wrong layered messaging. This isn't screen time. Collaborative learning, personalised feedback from your teacher, extending tasks at where you're at and meeting that individualised student in their learning. That is totally different to a 12-year-old who goes home and jumps on TikTok because their phone is probably their fast food screen time. It is a very, very different conversation.
Quality, healthy, considered diet is what we're talking about in terms of the approach to technology. I think it's the right screen time and the right device. And again, we talked about this recently on the episode. These everybody that wants to ban it it's interesting because these are the people that allow their children to have mobile phones when they get old. Well, there's a consideration of why a 10 or 11-year-old should have a mobile phone anyway. Okay. But then saying, well, I don't want them to have a greater device. Okay, that's fine. But you are allowing to sit in a room for 8 hours a day and be talked at? Which is worse?
That's really interesting.
So you don't want them to sit on and have experiences beyond the knowledge that a teacher do. I think we're expecting too much of teachers in terms of their knowledge anyway. We've all been teachers. Let's be honest. So how is a teacher getting their information and their learning? All of that. But also, as we create that classroom, and we then say, you know what, we've restricted green spaces. That went with a government many, many years ago. We restrict. We say that they do PE once a week, so they go outside once a week, but the rest of the time they sit in there. Okay, healthy diet, healthy experience, healthy screen time comes with actually physical activity, but a holistic approach. And what we're doing is looking at it in isolation, saying mobile phones are bad, so all screen time needs to go. It's not exactly. It's not the case.
And you know what? The other thing is as well is that there's nuance in all of that. Like you were saying about the difference between what you do on a laptop and what you do on a mobile phone, is that if we've built and taught agency and thought about critical thinking in schools, as parents, in youth clubs, wherever else we're doing this, we're supporting young people to make informed decisions. Like my 14-year-old absolutely loves TikTok. She absolutely loves it, and she would spend hours and hours and hours on it if she didn't have parents who actually supported her to think about how to do it. School don't talk about it. School say phones are banned. So any of the thing that we do with her is to try and to get her to think about. So now she's talking about languages again. So she had a really long streak on Duolingo, longer than what I've got. She had a really long streak on Duolingo, and then gave it up because she decided that she weren't doing it anymore. It's really interesting. Her little sister has now got a 130-day streak, and her dad's got a 250-day streak. And now Neve's found a different app because she doesn't want to be behind everybody on the streak. So now she's thinking she wants to do a learning of languages again. And the conversation that she's having about online banking and shopping, and she's doing things about reading online. She struggles picking up a book. That's not saying that she doesn't spend too long on TikTok. She probably does. She does spend too long on TikTok and Snapchat. But what do we do in terms of helping that healthy conversation? And I love what you said there about healthy diet. I love that idea of like a plate that we know that you're not just going to eat vegetables. I saw there's an interesting little thing on Instagram, by the way, the other day that I saw of a lady who had just eaten raw fruits and vegetables for her whole life. And died sadly recently because she didn't have she wasn't supplementing with it. So we want a balanced diet. We want to think through how we do this from a technology perspective, and I think that really ties to something else that we talked about at the event, but I know that you're super passionate about, and it gets into that like grey area around personalisation and what does personalisation really look like? Because if we're thinking about the future of education, and obviously technology enables that, but personalised education and learning versus one size fits all, how do we navigate that conversation would be interesting to think about.
And I think that again comes down to ecosystems, doesn't it? And setup. When we're thinking about this is specific within the technology space. So I said right at the start of this conversation, I quite often say, what's your student experience? How are they logging on? That's step one. And then what do they see on the screen? And then if they've managed to get in on it's a web search, web engine, and that's what everybody's got. And then the teacher's written on the board. And then you've got, again, the students slowly trying to put in. What we have within Clever is we have something called a portal. And this stopped people in bet. People would kind of be walking along and see the portal up on the big screen. And in some ways, for listeners, the best comparison might be the App Store. But you can then personalise the applications to the students that you're working in. They see exactly what has been carefully curated as part of a healthy diet. And they're the applications that are there and are for them. And if I went from one classroom to the next, they're going to have a different looking portal. Their experience will be different. What they have selected by the teacher, because that is what teachers can do best, isn't it? To personalise curriculum. They know their kids. We always talk about our kids. When you've got a class of 30, there's 30 children, you know what you want them to be doing. And likely they all should be having even different digital experience within any lesson, within any one day.
Yeah, and I go back to it. It's so key that ultimately, depending on clusters or individuals within class, everybody's getting an individual experience. But even just thinking about a personalised experience based on year groups, how many schools are even doing that? Or how many schools are even, or colleges or anybody thinking a difference between, I remember not a million years ago when I was still in education, where it's like students go in. It won't
be far off a million.
It's getting close. It's getting closer each year. The years count up, Ben, or add up. But yeah, I think I'm about 999 since I left teaching. 2017, getting closer to the 10-year mark. But just signing in, and you go student intranet, staff intranet when you log in page. Look, we've done a great job. And my question was, why that? What do we want them to do? And it turned out at the time that especially for students, that website was being tracked and was being reported by a particular team in regards to they needed people to get to that page and say how many, and they would go positive report. Go, look how many students are visiting this for help on like PDBW and all this other stuff. And I was like, that's not like, so they basically pushed it to that to try and get the feedback rather than actually, what about, is a year one compared to a year six getting a different experience? Are they getting different guardrails? Are they getting different, is the fact that in reception or early years, you've got free on there and it's really simple, but again, you don't need to double sign in, real simple, but actually there's a little bit there where there's that as they develop, you've then got to navigate, you've got to find, you've got to go into and think about the different ones and give a bit more complexity. So they've got to find some bits and make it easier, but a little bit more challenging. But we're just not even doing that.
Or build the application so there's choice. You've got, you know you're going to need to edit. Which editing tools do you want to use? And even that doesn't have to be digital. So one of the schools I've worked with, New Longton, there's a chap called Steve Archer, and he's done a fantastic job. And he's used Canva a lot with his students. And they were sort of building on this project. And he will say, do you want to create a poster, a leaflet? It was linked to their geography. Here's the paper, here's the creativity, here are the pens. Do you want to use Canva? What is your method to do this end of unit? And actually I think he has 30 children, but he said 2 chose pen and paper still. Great, the option was there. Interesting that the majority chose a digital choice and wanted to use Canva, also fine. But that's what you'd want to see who's in year 5. That difference between absolutely very easy, simple access down in early years, year 1, year 2. Then you can build, you can add in applications, and then you can get to a choice of applications for the same task.
Don't want to spend too much time on it, but maybe a bit of a throwaway comment. What's more secure, giving them 30 kids scissors or giving them access to a device that's managed and controlled and supported? My little daughter.
You can teach security and safety around all of them, can't you? But I think you're right. You're like giving people opportunity for that choice and agency. And I think most of us are at a point where, as we're reflecting back on our own learning and we're reflecting back on our own teaching, and we're seeing this for our own kids, and we're going, there has to be something different. And it feels a little bit, maybe it's funny because as a teacher, I always used to think that I knew best and everybody else had to do what I needed to say. I know that. I was that guy. No other teachers who are listening to this are like that. Obviously, I know that. But when my kid comes home and he's told, the teacher said this, this, and this, or they've treated him like this, or they've spoken to him like this, or they've made him do this, I'm outraged because I'm thinking, hold on a minute, we shouldn't be dictating how this goes. But we're in a world where that dictation and being told how to do something, and I wonder whether this becomes more political. I don't know, about choice. Like the whole idea of choice and an agency feels like we're swearing in the modern education system, like to suggest that young people might be able to make choices, and especially if we give them informed choices. That might be just a thought, that if we help them navigate choices rather than making their choices for them, I don't know, maybe that's where we need to spend more time.
I had that with my son over the Christmas holidays. It was sort of like a book review, reading, which, by the way, Steve, we could get back to the homework conversation. I'm always going to promote reading as a homework. I always think that reading should carry on happening. And however you experience language or books, I'm a big fan of audibles too, but that's the one homework I'm fully behind, reading and encouraging reading. Oh no, we're going to go off on a tangent, I can see.
I don't think it's homework. I think it's something that is, I suppose for those parents who aren't doing it, you're prescribing trying to influence the love of learning and the love of reading.
Absolutely.
Rather than you must read these 3 books. I brought some home and Ella was like, don't like that book, Dad. Can we read something else? And I was like, I think actually prescribing reading and supporting the whole research behind that is really, really positive. I just don't like the word homework and being told what to... I just don't like being told what to do with Ella when actually I want her to flourish and have a choice in terms of what she wants to do. Yeah,
instilling a love of reading, that's just absolutely... And as, like I say, primary educator from early years, and that phonics and reading, that's... but I do have similar views on homework. Back to my son. And we were shared reading, and he's in secondary school, so we were actually reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz because it had been of interest, and we listened to some of the Audible. We did quite a bit of driving while we were away as well, had some great conversations. So I was like, let's go. And we get back to the task. And it was effectively a written book review, or then there was a sort of a Google form. And I just I could sit at the dinner table. I don't know if you've read the book, and we were having really insightful conversations. I knew he'd done the learning, but it was the reporting of the learning that then became a barrier. And then we found a quiz. I think it was on Educake. And we did the quiz, and then we kind of said, this is how we've recorded our learning. Like you say, hopefully the teacher wasn't cross at me that I'd kind of changed the homework task, but that's just it. It's, if he would have been found a way to demonstrate his learning, he probably would have done a brilliant job of recording a voice note. He'd done the work. It was the recording that then became a blocker.
100%. And I know we're jumping around in terms of themes and trends and whatever else, but this is what we're talking about when we're trying to do this lifelong learning conversation, isn't it? It's that you want to create a love of learning, that they are inquisitive and curious. And yeah, they might not all have, there will be some things that we do in life where we wouldn't choose to do it. I sometimes think, like, sorting out my receipts, I hate doing it. Ironing, hate doing it. But they're things that you might have to do. But that doesn't mean that everything has to be dictated. Where can we create autonomy and choice so that we can instill that love of learning? And where you're talking about from your son's perspective, I think that would be relatively commonplace. The fact is that most, I might be being a bit controversial here, but in life, most people aren't gonna have to write a book report. And they're not. And now, with what is happening from a generative AI perspective, is it ever going to be that they're going to go down that route of having to, I don't know, just write in that reporting fashion and saying, I think it's shifting, isn't it? So I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's shifting because your son's in that space.
Yeah.
I think about myself in that space as well. Like I could talk to the cows come home around some stuff, and then I don't even know if it's right.
Let's imagine if instead of having this conversation, Clever had said, right, can you three do a fantastic 3-page blog? That would have got put off probably and kind of parked. But to jump onto a podcast, to be able to reach people on their way to work, to be able to record this conversation, it's just another way of the same learning. And I feel like there was a fourth square, and we had, so my son's in Key Stage 3 at the moment, and if we had some Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 educators on the call, they'd probably talk about the barrier or the blocker is the assessment. And actually, my son needs to be able to write that report and put pen to paper because his examinations. And that's the pathway that they're preparing them for, which I get and I agree. But when you have those periods of friction at home or in the classroom, and you're struggling to get a record of evidence, a record of understanding, that's when we can turbocharge education with tech as part of the balanced diet approach that leads up to those exams.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting in terms of that assessment. It goes back to that age-old question of teachers and educators and people in education are doing a great job, but are we guiding our learners, our young people, through their learning based on what we need them to do rather than what we need them to actually do? And what I mean by that is, are we getting them to do it based on an assessment or milestones in education, or do we get them because they need to be prepared for actually what they're going to do? And I'm not against writing, I'm not against reading, but how many people actually listen to audiobooks rather than make a choice of reading? How many people actually ever write a letter? I'm not talking about handwritten notes and that skill. I think most people will be writing, even if it's digital note taking. But actually, we're still asking people to do things in a particular way based on that's just not the way that life is now. I don't know. I've not looked at the GCSE paper from last year, but we're still asking people to write a letter. I'm really still concerned that we're asking people to write a letter, because on this call, and probably if I asked everybody that I came across how many people have actually done a handwritten letter, I don't think many people would say so.
Oh, no, I feel like I have to jump in here.
Okay,
because,
so you're saying that a handwritten letter...
Well, Ben does have beautiful handwriting.
He might do, I don't. Go on, Ben.
There's a few things just to think, and it's not saying that I'm not saying you're wrong in that way. I just want to throw some thoughts in. One is that there is evidence and multiple layers of evidence of what happens when people use this and the memory conversation. So there is
Yep,
something that's done differently between typing and writing. So, there's definitely.
So just on that, I said I still make notes. We still need
I'm
to
not at you,
write.
mate.
No,
We're friends.
not absolutely positively. But if it then is an endpoint assessment of the reason we have to get them to write and do all of this handwritten stuff is around not note taking, not the research and the positive bit. To write a letter, what I'm saying is it's not the skill of writing. I 100% think that is really key. It's the writing of a letter.
Yeah, so
It's the context of assessment, I suppose.
I do believe that I have conversations semi-regularly with my pal Mike, and we talk about handwriting, and I do handwritten notes. I have sets of cards in my drawer here, because I believe that writing letters or writing hand, and you're the same. So what I'm saying is that the output of writing something, a letter, a card or a postcard, that is a dying art, which I think needs to not die. But what you're saying is, and this is where we agree, what you're saying is that you can't force a conversation to be that's the only way, and you have to be able to do that. Or maybe I don't know. What do you think on that, Tori? Because I think as an English teacher, do we need that skill of letter writing, or is it time for that to go?
Well, we've arguably got, I think, lost and caught on letter writing. So we have got examinations that will come for our students. My son, when he hits his GCSEs, that will be long periods of extended writing. Maybe that will change. So currently that is there within the curriculum. We absolutely need children to have stamina to write in our current education system. I also fully supportive writing, handwriting, letter formation. Again, in primary school, it actually helps. There's lots of arguments about cursive handwriting, but sometimes the joins with phonics and spelling. So many benefits to writing. But I think we're all actually making the same point. That is the theme of this podcast: balance, diet, approaches. So if we know, and when you speak to English teachers, as an example, with a really jam-packed curriculum that they've got to get through, Macbeth in autumn term, if I've got that wrong, forgive me, and we've got to study that. That's when the opportunities for digital have got to enhance what's happening in the curriculum, support it, be an alternative option. And the experience quite often in primary schools is the barriers around technology mean that we don't get to throw it in the mix lower down the school so that we can have those skills.
And I think that choice makes things really difficult, and maybe that's one of the barriers to change, because if we give too much choice, how would we currently manage how we assess all of those choices that are made?
Yeah.
Like, we prescribe and we make it really narrow by these in this school, these are the book, this is the book, or this is the story, or this is how we're going to base it on, because they know that there's only be free tested anything else. Because we're testing somebody's ability to have learned or remembered the elements of the book or the story, rather than why they were passionate about that story and why they made that choice, and the research and the analysis of that story, and all those kind of things and it goes back to all of the big things. But by really broad brushing the choice, that makes it really difficult, because it makes it really difficult in the way that we assess right now, and it goes back to that assessment piece.
Yeah. And it comes back to that. It's sort of the curriculum, and I remember when the new national curriculum came in, and we called it the new national curriculum for however many years, and everyone kept referring it, are we now doing another new national curriculum? And that's what's coming. But there's still so much great stuff in the curriculum to be excited about, to be passionate about. I actually still love lots of what's done in the curriculum. It's the delivery, isn't it? It's the how and the engaging, and then, of course, assessments at the back end. But this, from a primary perspective, was super interesting with a group of schools I worked with, because we wanted an AI working group. And stick with me, this is linked. Wanted an AI working group, and we put it out to areas of interest. Who would like to come and join this working group as we develop new skills, we think about digital transformation in the curriculum? And I had a large proportion from the primary school staff than the secondary school staff. Now, Ben's nodding. My understanding, and I do not claim to have the right answer, is there's more freedom in the delivery of the curriculum. What do you think?
I would say so. I'm still chairing a primary school, and they seem to have a lot more flexibility. There's still the phonics screening, there's still the Key Stage 2 SATs, there's still that. And actually, my daughter's in year 6 now, so she is in that world where every lesson counts, every piece of homework counts, they're learning like frontal adverbials and these and that and the other, and you're like, when are you ever going to need that in life?
How are you getting on with that year 6 spag test? It's tough, huh?
It's not the most straightforward. But we're sat in there, and I think there seems to be more flexibility. There does seem to be more flexibility. Then you go into secondary, and obviously I taught in secondary, and most people look at year 7 and 8 and go, well, they were a bit pointless. I've literally heard teachers say that year 7 and 8 are pointless because then you get to year 9 and you start thinking about GCSEs. That's when and you're like, no. Year 7 and year 8 aren't pointless. There's more flexibility in 7 and 8, but I know, having taught at that level, that all you're doing really in 7 and 8 is getting them skill ready or knowledge ready to be able to smash into GCSE. In fact, I was at a school that proposed a 4-year GCSE, so they started in year 8. In fact, we were involved in that part, and obviously it's not allowed anymore, or it gets a little bit messy. But like spreading the content from year 8, and you're starting preparing for those exam style questions, and it just feels like the constriction at Key Stage 3, 4, and then actually at 5 gets messy. But all of us would say, and we've said this multiple times on the podcast, a lot of our guests over the years have been talking, we've got a lot to learn from early years and Key Stage 1. I say this all the time, like that.
I've got it on my notes.
Yeah, so much, because that level of play, that level of student autonomy, and about the role of the teacher in there is to coach and to spot and to realise where the students' weaknesses are and then develop, as opposed to here's a prescribed amount. And I think where you talked about curriculum earlier, I agree. There's so much amazing stuff. I loved pre-curriculum reform. I loved my religious studies curriculum. Like, it was class. I got to talk about real life stuff, and then religious studies just went off a cliff because it was about how many things you can remember, and this religion person does that, and compare it, and you just went, Matt, you've lost the whole point of what we're doing here.
If we were to stick with RE for a moment, because I had early years on my note, and I had this story about an RE lesson. So I was an RE lead as well. That can be another podcast then. And do you know Mary Myatt and all the work she's done on curriculum? And she's superb. Has she been a guest?
Not yet.
Oh,
Not
well,
yet. That would be
guys, cool. Yeah. And I was at a fantastic conference we did, and we talked about the quality and high expectations for conversations in religious studies and in those lessons. And I remember teaching a young man who definitely found the curriculum tough and academic and conversations. But in one RE lesson, he was struggling to focus, and I just gave him pen and paper, and he did some drawing while I was sort of doing the lesson, and he was struggling with the task. That's fine. He drew the most amazing, so he was 7, actually, it was year 2, the most amazing picture. And it was kind of like the world, and then he had like this serpent coming around it and coming down, and then it was dark on one side and light on the other. Honestly, he was exceeding expectations in his understanding of, we were in Old Testament, absolutely superb. But nothing in that lesson that I had planned would have teased that out of him until actually he went completely off track. He was disrupting the lesson, and I gave him a different task. And that's many years ago as well for me, Steve, that was when I was first teaching and thinking, this is the lesson that I need to stick to. This young man had gone off piece. Think on my feet, I'll give him some coloured pencils and a piece of paper. It's one of the best responses I'd ever had. And when we talk about this turbocharging education now and the variety of response to a task, it doesn't all have to be digital. But I would actually love to still be teaching that RE curriculum and thinking about the different ways I could do recordings and record evidence.
100%. I like as a when I think back to some of the best lessons I ever had, it was when it went off on a tangent. I've told the story 1,000 times of when one of my first ever observations, the head teacher who observed me at the time said, this little lad, Johnny Westwell, asked me a question, and he wanted to go down a different direction. And I said, no, we've got some things that we need to get through. That's not for today. And he went, if you'd have let that happen, what could have happened? That was his feedback to me afterwards. He said, it was a great lesson, don't get me wrong, but that could have just made that. Imagine what would have happened if you'd allowed that exploration to happen. And often we talk on the podcast. In fact, when we talked about this at Canva again, when we were talking about that exploratory curiosity, inquisitiveness in curriculum, that will require the thing that we keep talking about, Steve. It feels like a theme that we're coming out with is that we've got so much stuff in the curriculum, not enough space in the curriculum. And I think that's what's going to come out in this pick and mix conversation, is that we need space. And in that space, that's going to allow for some of the great conversations about whether stuff will still stick. Because if it's valuable, I say this quite a lot, if something's valuable, it'll stay, and the students will be interested in it, and the parents will still want that in, and the teachers will still want to talk about it, and industry will still want to talk about it, and it'll stay. Space rather than stuff, maybe.
Yeah. And then it's back, I know I've made this point, but it's back to, because our time is so precious and that space is so precious, we shouldn't have barriers like our kids not being able to log in, about not using the right applications. And that's when, again, this enterprise level ecosystem around your digital support in schools means you're using that space really carefully.
I think so. Space, access, and quicker access to space, but also that choice, I think, has really come out through the podcast. That, you know, when you give them space to explore, that actually means that you have to give them more choice to express that choice as well, in terms of assessment, in terms of what they're covering, in terms of everything else. We've not even got into the whole bit of choices, and ultimately prescribing what people can choose, even all of that kind of thing. I think choice, option, space to explore, and everything else is really, really key. We always end with 3 quick fire questions as we go into the podcast. I'll start, and then Ben will come in, and then I'll finish. But what is one outdated educational practice that we need to abandon?
Okay, I'm going to think with my clever hat on, and I'm going to say passwords on sticky notes, passwords stuck to devices, unsecure passwords across primary schools. They should be a thing of the past. They're not meeting DfE guidance, and there are really great solutions out there to solve that.
Agreed. I like that. So how should we measure learning success beyond grades then?
Oh, okay. That's difficult to answer because we'd still have grades. So if I'm imagining a world without them, I'd look to sort of those future skills, World Economic Forum, and I'm going to tell a story instead and link it back to the start of this podcast and my jumper that I've worn. So we talked about this. I actually did put this on in many ways for a reason. My 12-year-old son bought this for me at Christmas. And this is a little skill of his that I've held on to because he's 12 and he's a boy. And there's lots of times when homework can be a struggle. He's doing the just enough at school, but we were away at Christmas, and at the end he saw me look at this at the market, and it was the day before we were flying home and it was busy. We all sat down and got a drink, and he snuck off, and with his Christmas wedding money he bought me this jumper. Now that's how I measured my son. Like, what a gorgeous moment. And yes, that's not the education system, but I would love to build into it, if we were measuring without grade, quality and skill and conversation and communication. And I'm with you on Diary of a CEO, Ben. I'm a big fan. And you talk about emotional EQ and IQ. And I'd like to see some more space for that to measure progress.
What is one thing you would want our listeners to remember?
I'm pausing. I think I'd want them to remember that it's so varied what's happening with technology from classroom to classroom, and not to be dismayed, put off if the technology in your environment doesn't match up to another school and you're thinking, I'll never be able to do that. Widen the community, speak to some more people. There are structures in place to support, but we have a huge difference in our schools in the UK about the tech that's available and the tech that's being used.
Absolutely. It's been a great conversation. I know that it's been great to partner with Clever for this episode as well, and we're grateful for Clever working with us at that event pre-bet. And in the show notes, you'll be able to find all sorts of information about what Clever does, the work that it's doing, its mission, and some great stuff. So I know there's some incredible case studies and all sorts of stuff that are in there. So we're looking forward to sharing that with you as an audience. But what I really take from this, and the other thing that we probably didn't mention at the beginning, is that your partnership and your partner Pete's relationship in that conversation with Clever is showcasing that it's not just about tech people, it's not just about sales people, it's actually people who give one about education, who care about the development of that, and that's a real testament, I think, to Clever as an organization, that they've partnered with people that are genuinely not just all about selling a product, but are really trying to push the envelope for what really matters in education. So yeah, make sure that if you haven't done so already, check out Clever. Steve, is there anything you want to jump in on at the end?
Whenever we meet with Tara, whenever we meet with Pete when he comes along, when we're pleasured with his company always. But just with Tara, it's always a conversation that is stimulating, that will always be positive conflict and discussions, and I love that. I love the fact that we challenge each other. I didn't expect any less, but I'm going away going, I think we could probably do a second and a third and a fifth part and everything else. I think it's going to be definitely one where we go, does Tara now hold the record of the amount of time she's come on to the podcast? You know, we've got those. I honestly, we love spending with time with you. You're a massive supporter of ours. Clever's a wonderful partner with us as well. But beyond that, we just are aligned in regards to just wanting to step change and transform education for the right reasons. Everything else is a byproduct of wanting to really make a difference to the lives of young people, and it comes clear in the conversations always with you, Tara. So it's been a pleasure, mate, as always.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ben. And yeah, we'll share some more about Clever, because I do realise there was one thing I didn't talk about.
Go on, tell it. You've got time if you want to.
Have I got time?
Yeah,
if you've stuck around and you're really interested in another area that Clever can do, we talked a lot about access and sort of passwords and security, but we didn't go into the depths of layering and passwords growing with students as they age. So yes, you might start with a badge, then a badge and a password, or a PIN code. We've got multi-factor authentication. I'd want to see students learning about the complexity of passwords within the curriculum, developing their password skills. So yes, we want to make it easier in primary, even in early years, but not without layering that security. And it's something Clever do really well.
Yeah,
That's
love
a great
it.
point. A process and a product that grows with the age of the learner, not just for one and then he's one and done. Actually, as that progress and that support and that conversation is a great one. So yeah, please go check out Clever in the show notes and the details, and we will be seeing you and you supporting us at our next Uprising as an organisation
Absolutely.
again. So yeah, we'll have some face-to-face conversations. If you're interested in this and you want to buy tickets to the Uprising, still available, head across. Ben will give you the website, because I'll probably put about 15 different W's in it because I always get it wrong.
Edufuturists.com/uprising.
Perfect. It's there in June, and people like Tara and Pete and everybody else will be there to carry on the conversations that aren't just about partners selling product. It's about actually how can we have honest conversations, and these products will help, but it's not a sales pitch. So please come along. We're really excited to see you. And Tara, we'll probably see you before, but we'll definitely see you in Manchester soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Shaping